That's something that they continue to change. I'm not sure that the secular community has made up their mind on where that person was in timeline. But how is the Neanderthal consistent or inconsistent with the biblical worldview?
Well, it really isn't, because so many of the studies have come out now saying basically that Neanderthals are just another one of us. They're just another human, just different racial traits or different genetic traits. But similar enough that indeed now they argue they interbred and they could live in the same areas, etc. Just another people group, like we have different people groups today. And so I mentioned there's some out there that are not up to date, but that's something I've been interested in for quite a while because I'm part Neanderthal, as many of my friends are. And therefore, the comparisons are interesting. And I try to keep up with the literature, and I'm not aware of any leading paleoanthropologist who makes the claim that they were a different creature that lived a long time ago. They most say that they lived in contemporaneously with us, and they're just another people group. Like we have different people groups today. We have Asians and Europeans, and Africans, and other people groups. So they just another people group.
Well, but how would you explain them from, I'm assuming that you would explain them back from Noah's sons after they got off the ark and then those people groups started to spread out.
Mm-hmm.
How would you explain them, I guess, from that timeline, or would they be pre-flood?
Well, no, I don't think they're pre-flood days. You have an enormous amount of variation in many, many creatures, like dogs. We all know the dogs came from the wolf kind. We know that because we did it. And yeah, you have what, 500 and some breeds now? And they're so very different. How could indeed all these dogs come from one type of dog? Well, they did, because we know that. And we know that because we did it. We can tell where the breeds came from. Breeds are often named according to where they were bred or according to what they do. And the same thing is true with humans. You have an enormous amount of variety in humans. You have so much intermarriage, though, that you don't tend to get the variety that you do in dogs, because dogs, you can breed specific traits and breed out certain traits or breed in certain traits. Where people, we haven't done that. In fact, more and more you see intermixing now. In fact, the concern is genocide by marriage. And genocide by marriage is where you eliminate races by intermarriage. And some people see that happening in the United States. 1 out of 6 marriages now are interracial marriage. So what's going to happen 300 or 400 years from now, if this system continues the way it is, what's going to happen is that it's going to be harder and harder to tell the difference between, quote, a black and a white, because intermarriage is so common. And we see that the different races had to come about through a lot of breeding within a certain group, like dogs did. And therefore you see the interbreeding is producing mixing of different groups, called, of course, genocide by marriage. The main cause of genocide by marriage is the Jews. So many Jews have intermarried that there's not many, quote, pure Jews left today because of intermarriage. And so the Jews are concerned about this because genocide by intermarriage is causing Jews to become extinct. And so therefore that's one reason for the nation of Israel, because the nation of Israel then will allow Jews to marry Jews, which will maintain the unique traits which Jews at one time had. But that's not working as well as they hoped, of course, in Israel, because again, people don't tend to marry based on similarity of racial traits. They tend to marry on similarity of other traits, propinquity and people you meet. And so therefore, anyways, that's a rabbit trail.
Yeah, I think the native Hawaiian Islanders are having a similar problem. I think they're down to maybe like 10% left of them.
Yeah.
A lot of your militant critics of separate ancestry and our explanation for Neanderthals, that they're fully human. I mean, we have their genes, they're a sophisticated people group. Jerry, you've done a very thorough presentation with us on Neanderthals, going over the evidence for spirituality, purposeful navigation. They made cosmetics, but they'll look to the genetic differences when comparing Neanderthals to us today. And they will argue, because of those differences, as well as some of your differences in morphology, that they cannot be in the direct line from Adam and Eve and then obviously Noah after the flood. What would be a good response to that argument that suggests Neanderthal genetics are too different to us as modern Homo sapiens for them to have originated from Adam and Eve, Dr. Bergman?
My response would be too different is a judgment that people are making. And my concern with genetic evaluations, especially of creatures that have been around for 2,000 years ago, is that I know in teaching forensics, we would find a body of a pretty sure they know who it was, that when she died by 1946, and they find the body and they do genetic evaluations, and all too often they're worthless or very difficult to do genetic testing. And so if you're concerned about the fidelity of genetic differences, someone that died in 1946, what about someone that died 2,000 years ago? And unless their bodies are protected greatly, I know that they've tried really very hard to reduce contamination and so on. But on the other hand, you've got cosmic radiation, which breaks down very effectively the DNA. And therefore, even if they're buried pretty deep in the earth, it's going to be some cosmic radiation or some radiation from the radiation emitting from the radioactivity decay in the surface of the earth. And that's going to change some of the genes. And so I just question whether or not their findings can be as good as they claim. I know they claim they go in a clean room and they try to reduce contamination, et cetera. But on the other hand, given what we know about in forensics about bodies that have been buried 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, I just can't get around the idea that these 2, 3, 4,000 year old bodies would have enough fidelity in the DNA to make accurate comparisons.
That's a good response. And you and I, Dr. Bergman, in your show on Neanderthals, we talked about the evidence that suggests how isolated they were, inbred. Some of the DNA analyses has suggested that they were one of the most inbred people group on the planet. They had these massive stretches of identical letters, the increased levels of homozygosity. And so, of course, over time, that would change the DNA anyways. And so I don't see why we would expect Neanderthal DNA to be exactly the same as human DNA today. And so those differences, I don't believe, are the problem that evolutionists would say it is. Sam, did you have a follow-up question, or did you want me to grab a question here? Because I do have one here from Mistletoe. And he's asking, related to your presentation, Dr. Bergman, he says, can Dr. Bergman talk